A very, very good morning to you. It's your girl Sarah right here on Relax Radio. Now, I hope you're having a beautiful morning because it is a Friday morning after all, and that means it's something that we can all be excited for, right? Because I'm not wrong when I say we're all excited for Fridays. So obviously, that's what we're here for. We're all excited about Fridays, and I'm excited for this beautiful Friday as well. Now, you're tuned into the sunrise, and I'm here to actually keep you company all the way until 9 a.m. I have a lot of interesting and fun content for you, especially with some tips to start your day with positivity, to make sure you feel better, to make sure that everyone else around you feels better, and to make sure that you're having the bestest of days, because that's what we do right here on Relax Radio. We want to make sure that every time we're here, every time that we're having a conversation with you, we want to make sure that you feel like you're having the best of days, because honestly, Relaxed Radio is all about positivity. We always make sure that there's no negativity. We always want to make sure that you feel better. We always want to make sure that you're having the bestest of days. So that's what we're doing right here on Relax Radio. Now, if you're really interested in some of the content that we talk about, make sure to actually go follow us on our socials, which is Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Okay, don't actually forget to go follow us because you can find yourself with a lot of amazing content. You can always make sure that you're informed, that you're aware about everything that is happening, especially because in this time and age, you need to make sure that you're informed. You need to make sure that you're aware about everything that is going on. So make sure you stay tuned because, like I said, we're going to be talking about a lot of interesting things, and we're always going to make sure that you are part of the conversation. We're going to be talking about things that are relevant to you. So make sure you do that. Make sure you stay tuned, and make sure you share this conversation with not just your friends, your family, but also people who are close to you, people who can relate to whatever it is that we're talking about. So make sure you do that. And actually, don't forget to download our app either, which is available on both the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store. All you need to do is just, head on over to the App Store, the Google Play Store, and download the app. Just type Relax Radio on that search bar and you can find it. Just download that app and make sure you stay tuned to the conversation because it's definitely going to help you be more aware. It's definitely going to help you be a part of the conversation at any time of the day from anywhere in the world. So don't forget to do that. And also, if you want to get in touch with me during the show, if you want to share your thoughts and ideas with me, make sure you do that. Okay, all you need to do is just text me on 078 and that way you can actually get in touch with me. You can call me, you can text me, you can share your thoughts, your opinions, questions, whatever it is that you have, you can actually share it with me. So don't forget to do that. But right now, let's actually head into our conversation because today's conversation is about cheering up. Okay, and I'm here to tell you how to feel better. I'm going to give you some tips on what exactly you need to do to feel better, especially because we've all been living through these tough times, right? So whenever we're starting the day, sometimes before lockdown was lifted and before all these restrictions were lifted, we would all start the day like this, right? Because our lives were actually depressing at one point. Our lives were so monotonous, and there was actually nothing exciting happening in our lives. And so obviously we started our days like that, and the rest of the day droned on as well, and no one was really excited to be alive at that point of time, right? Because things weren't actually going the way it normally would. Nothing was the way it was. We weren't Everything was really, really different, which meant that we had to actually adjust to a lot of change. And because of that, when you're adjusting to all of that change, it got very, very hard. So none of us were actually that happy. However, because we have all been going through that, that's why I'm here to actually help you feel better. I know the lockdown has been lifted. I know these restrictions that were placed don't really exist anymore, or they have been lifted, or they're not as strict as they used to be. However, even though that's the case, we still need to make sure that we are happy. We still have some tips to make us feel better, because even though this is partially over, sometimes we can get those negative feelings back. So in instances like that, how do you feel better? Stay tuned because I'm going to be telling you all about that. But also, if you have any thoughts, if you have any questions, make sure to text me on 078 because I do want to know what you're thinking. I do want to know what you're feeling, and I do want to know whatever your questions and thoughts are. So please do get in touch with me, okay? So to get into our topic, the pandemic has obviously launched an all-out attack on emotion, on the emotion happiness, right? And I know I'm not the only one who's felt that. I know you felt that as well, because obviously we've all been very stressed out. We've all had to, go through different feelings, and all of those feelings weren't necessarily positive. Most of it was in fact very negative, because all of us were tired of the pandemic. Our lives were so monotonous. We wanted some sort of change. So obviously at that point in time, the pandemic, or even right now, the pandemic did in fact launch an all-out attack on the emotion that we call happiness, right? And with much of the world actually stripped out of socializing, and everyone confined to cramped apartments, the past 12 months might well go down with the grimmest passage in living memory, right? Because we might as well call it that, because life has never been as depressing and as sad and as grim as it was, a few months back, right? And a lot of people were in fact experiencing this spike in loneliness, anxiety, and suffering, and even depression, right? And it makes a lot of sense, because if you're someone who used to have a social life, if you're someone who always used to go out, you'd always hang out with your friends, and your way of distracting yourself from all of the different problems that you had was through, going out and whatnot. Then obviously when the pandemic happened, when lockdown happened, and when there were restrictions and whatnot, you obviously couldn't go out, right? So at that point, especially because lockdown wasn't just a few weeks, it was an extended period of time, and it wasn't just one lockdown, right? It was multiple lockdowns, which meant that we'd constantly have to change the way that we lived. We wouldn't be able to go out the same way that we used to, and because of things like that, obviously it was very, very hard, right? And a lot of us suffered from anxiety. A lot of us dealt with depression. We all struggled with anxiety and depression, and even loneliness, right? Because loneliness was in fact at an all-time high during the pandemic, okay? So obviously you can understand that most of the pandemic did in fact have a lot of negative feelings, right? And as terrible as that is to say, it was a very dark time. It was a very grim time, not just for you and me, but for everyone, right? So there was in fact a lot of negative emotions. There was in fact a lot of, not really positive emotions to actually, that people actually had to deal with. So for those who are actually feeling downtrodden and in need of a dire dopamine hit, is there in fact a way to become much more happier? Is there a way for them to become more chipper, right? To put it that way, is there any way that they can be happier, that they can feel better? And or is there actually this sense that forcing us to maintain small simple lives, that the pandemic has in fact helped, the pandemic has actually helped us zero in on what truly makes us happy? So is this something that we can actually do, or has the pandemic just made us realize what exactly we need to do to become happy? Is it living a simple life? Is it having a very complicated life? What exactly is it, right? Because these are a whole lot of questions that I have, and I know I'm not the only one who has these questions. I know you have it too, because we've all been through similar feelings throughout the pandemic, okay? So if you have any other questions that you want to ask me, make sure you text me on 078 to get in touch with me, to share your thoughts with me, because I want to know what you're thinking. I want to know what you're feeling, and I want to know your questions. Your questions about whether a person can truly be happy, and what exactly happiness is. How do we make ourselves feel better in these, tough times, in these, tiring, tough, stressful times? Okay, what can we do? So do get in touch with me. Call me, text me. You can even comment on our live stream, on our videos. You can comment, and I can actually respond to them. So make sure you do that, because I would love to know what you're thinking, right? So basically, has the pandemic actually made us more depressed, or has the pandemic actually made us figure out what exactly happiness is? How exactly do we achieve this happiness as well? Now, asking if there is a way to become happier is in fact a bit like asking how to beat the house in Vegas, right? Which is something a bit, hard to answer, because how exactly do you become happy? And how exactly can you say, look, happiness exists, but there are some things you need to do? And happiness is different for everyone, right? Just because I find happiness through one thing, that doesn't mean that everyone else will find happiness that exact same way, because happiness is different for everyone. People experience it differently. What makes me happy might not necessarily make someone else happy, right? Because happiness is different for everyone. It's this hugely diverse emotion that all of us feel, and it's one of the most beautiful feelings, because obviously we love being happy, right? We love feeling good about ourselves. We love feeling good about the life we're living. So nobody likes to be sad, obviously, and everyone wants to be happy. So how exactly do we find happiness? Can you actually be happy? Is there a way to become happy? So those are questions that we all have. Now, there's actually someone called Mike Viking who has a few ideas on how to feel better and to cheer up. So he actually founded the Happiness Research Institute, which is an independent think tank in 2013. So what they're actually doing is they're pledging to look at happiness from a scientific perspective. So they pour over reams of data and they try to figure out why some folks are happier than others, and how societies can in fact boost their citizens' well-being. Okay. Now he's also been very, very busy lately because he opened a happiness-themed museum, the first in the world in Copenhagen in 2020. So in the middle of last year, he actually opened this happiness museum, and he's actually been also advising the Nordic Council of Ministers on how exactly social media impacts young people's well-being. And he also released this paperback version of Happy Moments, which is basically a book about creating positive memories. And he also oversaw this global survey of COVID-19's impact on happiness. Right. So, we know that he's playing a huge role in society right now, because he's helping people find happiness. He's helping, societies, companies, organizations actually focus on their employees and citizens' well being. So, to make sure that everyone who works there, everyone who lives there is in fact happy, right? Which is actually, a really great thing to do, because more often than not, we tend to forget about our happiness. We tend to forget that we ourselves are human. We ourselves need to be happy because we're so busy with everything else. So we forget that we ourselves need to focus on being happy. We need to make sure we're happy, because if we don't, focus on ourselves, and if we don't focus on our happiness, it's actually not going to be that helpful. It's actually going to be quite bad, because you're going to be depressed, you're going to be sad, and you're going to be suffering all the time, simply because you didn't focus on your happiness, simply because you didn't think about your happiness and think about yourself, right? Now make sure you stay tuned, because we have just started the conversation. There's so much more to keep talking about, especially in terms of happiness and how to feel better. So until then, make sure you stay tuned, because right now we're actually going to head into a small break.
We've seen it, right? If an owner of a large public traded company does something wrong, irrelevant of what that company does or how valuable that company is, the stock generally falls into a pool of nothing, right? Because in a public company where the stock is traded openly on the stock exchange, the value of that stock is driven by supply and demand, it's driven by emotion, it's driven by news, it's driven by quite a lot of variables over and above the actual accounting or total net worth of that company. I mean, we've seen it, right? If an owner of a large public traded company does something wrong, irrelevant of what that company does or how valuable that company is, the stock generally falls into a pool of nothing, right? And the company may still have value, it may still be doing quite a good thing.
Again. But now, if you say to a child, if I went up to a child and said, "You've had one to forget," God, there'd be an inquest. Me, why did you reject my son? Well, I haven't rejected your son.
I want to talk about, how the generation gap, has how much it's changed, especially when you check the youth nowadays in comparison, to people back in the day.
I'd say when I was younger, it was more disciplined. Not now.
In comparison to now.
Not at all. Not now. The way things are nowadays, the younger generation, you seem that they can't accept the word no. If that makes sense.
They can't accept rejection. Essentially, is what you're trying to say.
Yeah, they can't accept the word no. So if how did I do? Or you didn't do very well, and they get upset. And when I was a youngster, my father used to say to me, because I used to be sport mad when I was very young. Well, I still am sport mad, but like participating in different sports. And if I had a bad game, for example, he'd say to me, "You had one to forget." That's it.
Your dad sounds like a smart guy. I mean, yeah, that's the real fact of the matter. Yeah.
He'd say to me, "You had one to forget. Get over it," and that was it. So I dust myself down and do it again. But now, if you say to a child, if I went up to a child and said, "You've had one to forget," God, there'd be an inquest. An inquest. I mean, why did you reject my son? Oh, I haven't rejected your son. Or daughter. I've just told them that they need to buck their ideas up.
That's the truth right there. I mean, if you think about it, if you check the generations, like right now in the US as well, I've seen a lot of these things as well. In the UK, you get medals for participation. But what's the point? What's the point? Either you win or you lose. People are so afraid to put that whole notion of losing. When it comes to right now, the generation gap is just crazy. How much a lot has changed. Social media has taken control of our lives, and we don't even realize it anymore. We're crippled because of it.
That's absolutely right, Nick. Because, as you said, nowadays it seems that you get rewarded for failure. For the life of me, Nick, I can't get my head around that. Perhaps I'm just getting old and morbid. I don't know. I just can't get my head around how you could be rewarded for failure.
Welcome back to the show. It's your girl Sarah right here on Relax Radio. Now we're having a very interesting conversation, a live conversation on how exactly to feel better, what exactly you can do to feel better. And I know that's something that you all want to know. I know that's something you all want to find out because our lives have been very, very stressful the past few months. And I'm not wrong when I say we all need a few tips on how to be more positive, on how to be more excited about life. Because to be quite honest, let's face it, we've all been a bit depressed, we've all been a bit stressed out, especially because of the way things have been working out. Right, so obviously that is what we have been talking about, and that is what we're talking about as well. So if you are very interested in this conversation, if you're interested in the content we talk about, well, you can actually go follow us on our socials, right? You can go follow us on Facebook, or rather you can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, and you can even like us on Facebook, okay? Because we have more of this same content, we have more similar content on our socials, and that way you can stay informed. You can always be aware about everything that happens, not just here in the United Kingdom, but in fact all over the world as well. So make sure you keep it locked to Relax Radio on all of these, social media apps, because that way you will always be the first to know about everything, okay? And also don't forget to download the app, which is available on both the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store. That way you can join into this discussion from anywhere in the world at any time of the day. And I honestly don't think it can get any better than that. So don't forget to do that, because it's going to be absolutely amazing if you are a part of this discussion. And if you really, really want to, contribute to our conversation, which I really think you should, you can actually text me on 078-5247-3473 to share your thoughts with me, to share your ideas with me, so everyone else who's listening in can also find out about it, okay? Now don't forget to do that, because it's definitely going to help all those other people out there who are feeling, quite terrible, who are feeling like their life can't get any better. It's going to help them feel better as well, because that's why I'm here. Sarah on the Sunrise is actually here to help you feel better, to make sure that you feel good about yourself, to give you some positivity, to help you with the way you see the world, to help you with dealing with the world, especially when you wake up in the morning, okay? And I know it's really hard to sort of wake up in the morning and make that decision to make that decision to come to do whatever it is that you're supposed to do, to wake up, to get over your bed, to get off your bed rather, to go to work, come back home, and do all of those things that you're supposed to be doing. So that's why I'm here to give you that daily dose of positivity, that daily dose of motivation, because I know you can do it and I believe in you. Okay, so let's get back into our conversation. So we were just talking about Mike Viking, who actually is um the founder of the Happiness Research Institute, where they do a lot of work. Actually, they basically pour over reams and reams of data to actually make sure that they can scientifically analyze how happiness works, and to advise companies, societies, rulers, on how they can actually make sure that their citizens' well-being is prioritized. So that's the work he has been doing. And last year, actually in 2020, obviously, he opened this happiness museum in Copenhagen, and it's the first happiness museum in the world. And what's crazy though? It's basically taken you 2021 years to figure out that this world needed the happiness museum. That should have been thought of a really long time ago. Well, I'm not complaining, because at least now it's there, so I'm glad that people can go to this museum and figure out how it works, right? And it looks really cool. If you haven't seen it, you can go check it out on Google until time allows us to actually go traveling again. Okay, so make sure to do that, because it's absolutely amazing. I mean, it's something that you'd never think about, right? A happiness museum, would that ever have crossed your mind? Because it definitely wouldn't have crossed mine until I saw this, and I was thinking, oh my gosh, that's so cool. Why has nobody ever thought about this before? So to get back into our conversation, now Viking actually found success in 2016 with the little book of Hugo, right, which is basically or rather the Danish art of being cozy and content during harsh winters. And it also sold more than 1 million copies worldwide. But the Happiness Research Institute is in fact Mike Viking's baby. Okay, and the thing is, it actually sounds something like something out of a Hans Christian Andersen tale, but it is in fact filled with puppies and ice cream, as he puts it. So the office actually houses 10 analysts who basically use all the intel they've gathered to advise governments, foundations, employers, and impact investors, which are basically companies that want to invest in something which will make a difference to the world. Okay, so what he basically had to say about this was that quantifying happiness is difficult. And let's face it, you can't really quantify happiness. Like, how exactly do you measure it, and what exactly do you use to measure it, and how do you basically quantify happiness for different people? Because what I find happy might not necessarily make you happy, right? The fact that my favorite singer actually just released some new music is going to make me happy, but my favorite singer might not be your favorite singer. In fact, you might hate my favorite singer, so you might not be too glad that he released some new music that is very controversial, right? So obviously, in instances like that, how exactly do you do this? Now stay tuned, because I will be sharing the science behind it and how it works as well. And also, if you have any thoughts, if you have any questions, make sure to text me. Let me know what you're thinking, let me know what your thoughts are, because I want you to share your opinions with us. I want to know what you're thinking as well. Okay, so don't forget to do that, because I really want to hear what it is that you're thinking, and I really want to hear I really want to hear whatever it is that you want to do, what your thoughts and opinions are. So make sure to share them with me. So getting back into our conversation, I just said how quantifying happiness is in fact difficult, but it's not impossible, right? And Viking actually says this because and he also adds to the fact that we measure a lot of things that are subjective, right, such as stress, loneliness, and depression. So why exactly don't we measure happiness? Because it's not impossible, it's just a bit difficult, right? So one of the ways to actually deal with subjectivity is to follow individuals over time, right? So for their pandemic study, the happiness research actually quizzed 3,211 participants up to 6 times each over 3 months. Okay, and what they basically did was they broke down happiness into common elements, things like overall life satisfaction, like all things considered, how satisfied are you with your life these days, and whether your mood is positive on any given day, and whether you have a sense of purpose or meaning, which is basically based on Aristotle's thoughts on good life, which is also known as eudaimonia, right? So that's how they actually quiz the participants. And the best way to make sure that you know that this that these statistics are in fact consistent, or that they're updated rather, is to constantly make sure that you question your participants within a given time, so that way you can actually measure happiness, you can actually quantify happiness actually, and make sure that they are aware and they know what exactly it means to be happy. So you can do it, it's not impossible, it's just a bit difficult. So the COVID-19 survey that was done by the Happiness Research Institute actually found that while daily moods have dipped during the pandemic, the sense of purpose rather hasn't waned, right? So your daily sense of happiness might have dipped. It might have reduced, because obviously with everything that's going on, you can't expect people to be happy, right? I mean, sure, I'm happy about the fact that I am getting to spend more time with my family, but other things considered, I'm upset about the fact that I couldn't go out the same way I used to. I couldn't hang out with my friends. And as human beings, we need our social life. We need to go out. We need to meet our friends and hang out with our friends. We can't always be stuck at home. I mean, unless, of course, you're an introvert, but even then, introverts do have one point where they decide, look, I need to go out, I can't keep locking myself up in my room, right? So like I said, even though these daily moods have basically dipped during the pandemic, their sense of purpose actually hasn't waned, right? Now, the UN's latest World Happiness Report, which actually similarly acknowledged a 10% increase in day-to-day sadness and worry, stated that life satisfaction had in fact remained on par with previous years, right? And other polls have even suggested that people have been happier during COVID-19, which is quite ironic, right? And I know if you're listening, since you're listening in right now, it sounds a bit controversial or hypocritic, because on one hand I'm saying, look, people weren't that happy, but on the other hand, there were some polls that showed that people were in fact much happier during the pandemic. So I again, it depends on how exactly the pandemic affected people, right? If you were very hugely impacted by the pandemic, then chances are you're not necessarily going to be that happy, because it has created a lot of detrimental impacts for you, right? For example, if you've lost your job, if you lost a close family member, you lost your source of income, you can't provide for your family, and your family and you are sort of struggling to make ends meet, then obviously you're not necessarily going to be happy, right? But say you're a middle class household, or you are an upper middle class household, and you actually have enough money to, or you had enough money to actually get through those tough times, and you actually spend more time with your family. Y'all made a lot of tasty food, y'all hung out with your family, you played a lot of board games, you even got a dog or a pet. Even if that was how the pandemic affected you, then chances are you are much happier, right? Because obviously for all the other people out there who weren't actually struggling, who had enough money to get through the pandemic, for them this was actually a time of rest. You finally got to take a break from that busy lifestyle you had, that stressful lifestyle you had, and you got to spend time with your family. So like I said, it depends on how exactly the pandemic affected you. If you were someone that was very hugely affected by the pandemic, if you were poor and if you lost your job, then you're not necessarily going to be that happy. Whereas if you weren't that affected by the pandemic, it's not going to be that bad for you. So that's basically how it works, right? That's basically how happiness works. But happiness is also small things, because I will explain this to you further as well, because Mike Viking says that one of the main sources of happiness is in fact being able to provide for your family, is having meal with your family. It's so simple things that you do with your family, or with people who are close to you and you love, that actually makes life much easier, that makes life much happier and better, and makes us cheer up as well. Okay, so make sure you stay tuned, because like I said, I have a lot to be talking to you about. I have a lot of interesting conversation to be having with you as well. And if you have any thoughts, if you have any questions, any opinions, make sure to share with me. All right, because I want to know what you're thinking, I want to know what you feel, and I want you to share your opinions with us as well. Okay, and while you're at it, don't actually forget to go follow us on our socials, which is Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. That way you can actually make sure that you're tuned into the conversation, that you're always informed and you're aware about everything that happens. Now, make sure you stay tuned, because right now we're actually going to head into a small break. But after that, we will be back to keep talking to you about how exactly this works and how to make yourself feel better.
Valuations that you place on an asset are always behind you. It's always in hindsight. It's never in front of you. And that's one of the challenges, right? Because you're always valuing what happened yesterday, and what you need is what's going to happen tomorrow. What am I saving or investing for? Why am I doing it? When will I need the money? And how much money do I need? Yeah. So that's quite important, because when you're looking at your net worth, you got to start with saying, well, what do I want my net worth to be, so that there's a goal, and then work backwards. How do I get there? And if I can start with £50 or $50 a week, if I save that every week, and you can go online and use calculators online. I don't have to teach you the maths behind it, but you can say, okay, and if I get a 3% return and I put this away for how long will it take to reach my goal? And that's called just this basic cash flow projection calculations. And it's what we use in financial planning all the time. What we say to clients is we say, okay, what is your goal? What is your objective? Where do you want to go to? And we discuss that in a lot of detail and over most of the meeting. And then the rest of it is saying, okay, in your exact circumstances, with your risk profile, with how you feel about investments and pensions and taxes and where you are and who you work with, and your education level or your lack of education or how involved you want to be. There's a lot of variables that we take into account, and then we say, okay, here's a plan. You start like this, that's great. And then we review it all the time. And we say, okay, we need to increase it, we're on track, we're not, this is what is happening. Because remember, when you're dealing with assets, the valuations that you place on an asset are always behind you. It's always in hindsight. It's never in front of you. And that's one of the challenges, right? Because you're always valuing what happened yesterday, and what you need is what's going to happen tomorrow. So that's a struggle. Yeah. So there are strategies everywhere from £50 a week up to £100 million, and they're different. Right? They range differently from everyone, but and from country to country, to be fair. Different countries have different tax laws, so with different vehicles. But from your point of view, at the sort of normal end, I'm not going to call it the low end because I'm in that boat as well. It's as tax efficient as you can get it. That's where you start. You use all the tax efficiencies, and then you step up into different things.
Welcome back to the show. It's your girl Sarah right here on Relax Radio. Now, I'm very, very excited to be here on this beautiful Friday morning. Obviously, I'm excited because it's a Friday, but also I'm excited because I'm here to actually give you a lot of tips on how to be positive, a lot of tips on how to have a much better, a much more cheerful life, because I know all of us have been struggling on being cheerful. All of us have been struggling about being happy, especially during this point of time, right? And the reason is because, there have been so many changes that took place. There have been so many things that, completely changed, right? So to adjust to all of those things, to actually come to terms with the world, with how much the world has changed, our moods also changed significantly, right? So that's why I'm here to actually tell you to cheer up, and or rather give you tips on how to exactly cheer up and how to feel much, much happier and much, much better about yourself. Okay, so that's what the conversation is about. Now, make sure you stay tuned, because I'm actually going to keep having this conversation with you, right? And if you have any thoughts, if you have any opinions, any questions that you want to share with me, make sure you text me on 078 to get in touch with me, to share your thoughts, to share the things that you did to, be happy, to feel happier, so I can share with everyone else who's listening in as well. And obviously, don't forget to actually go follow us on our socials, which is Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. That way you can stay updated about the latest content about what happens, not just here in the United Kingdom, but in fact all around the world as well. So make sure you stay tuned, because that is definitely going to help you sort of realize, and it's definitely going to help you understand what exactly is going on in the world. And don't forget to download the app either, which is available on both the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store. That way, you can always listen into the conversation from anywhere in the world at any time of the day. So don't forget to do that. But right now, let's actually head back into our conversation about happiness and cheering up, and how exactly, we need to change our lifestyles to feel happier, to feel better. Now, obviously, we have this big question, right? Why hasn't there been a more comprehensive happiness slump, right? And Viking actually says that draining commutes have in fact disappeared, and family time has increased, and for most people, the main contributors to happiness have remained fairly stable. Okay, because a lot of people, like I said, I mean, there were some people out there who lost their jobs, who weren't, whose things actually, whose lifestyle actually got much, much worse than what it was. But for most people out there, that wasn't the case, because they could still afford to do some of the things that they used to do. And also, the fact of the matter is that their contributors to happiness were in fact very, very simple. Things that were very achievable, things that anyone would actually want to be happy, right? For most people, right? So because those things remain fairly stable, they didn't actually have any slump in terms of their happiness, right? So, putting good food on the table with loved ones is still perhaps the most universal source of happiness, right? And Mike Viking says this, and this is what I was telling you earlier as well. For a lot of people out there, putting good food on table with the loved ones is in fact one of the things that makes them happiest, right? It is in fact the universal source of happiness, because can you, I mean, you can't imagine any other form of happiness other than the happiness with your family, right? And for me, that's the same as well, because my constant source of happiness is my family. I mean, sure, we have a lot of fights and there's a lot of disagreements, but at the end of the day, they're the ones I would go to if I had a problem. And they would be the ones I would tell something first to, because I know they're my family. And for a lot of people out there, that's the exact same way they feel about family. And that's just a lot of people, right? And I'm not saying families aren't without fault, and I know some families can be toxic, but for a lot of people out there, that's not the case. So for most of them, putting food on the table with their family is in fact what makes them the most that makes them the happiest, right? So if you're thinking about the pandemic and you're thinking about what exactly has the pandemic done then to sort of change people's happiness and all of that, what the pandemic has actually done is underscore the joy of simple pleasures, right? Because the link between happiness and money has been well documented over the years, right? And while in general rich people are happier than poor people, it's not actually because money buys happiness, but that being without money and unable to afford food and shelter causes unhappiness, right? And that's just the truth of it. We always, there's this saying, right? Sometimes money buys you happiness because you can afford the things that you have and whatnot, right? And the truth is, rich people are generally happier because they have have the money to afford food and shelter, right? Which are basic things which are basic needs of survival, especially, as humans, those are basic needs of survival. You need food, you need shelter to survive. So if you're rich, you can generally afford those things, right? Whereas if you're poor, you're going to be unhappy because you're going to, it's going to be a bit of a struggle for you to actually afford those things. It's going to be a bit of struggle for you to actually, try to buy the things that you want to eat, buy the things that you like to eat, and even pay rent for where you live, right? So that's why, contrary to the popular term, money, it's not that money actually buys happiness, but it's just that when you have money, you can afford things that will make you happy, right? So once you've once you've passed a certain threshold, and you're already making good money, and you make, say, about 200 pounds extra, you can actually buy a more expensive bottle of wine, but sometimes it doesn't really matter. What's important is that you have the money to afford, you have the money to buy whatever it is that you simply need for your family, right? For example, for our family, we constantly buy a lot of food, a lot of vegetables, because we cook a lot, right? I was telling you this yesterday as well, because it's more of a family tradition for us to cook together, and that's what we do. So in terms of being able to afford food, like, sure, yeah, that's what makes all of us happy, because that means we get to spend time with our family, we get to, continue our traditions. However, for most people, even if you can buy that extra bottle of wine with that extra 200 pounds you earn, that doesn't really matter, because you're already happy, you're already, at peace, you're already satisfied with the job you have, with the life you have, right? The pandemic has actually made that clear by decoupling wealth from happiness. Okay. So, what that actually means is you can't actually go on exotic holidays or to fancy restaurants, but you can go walking. So, perhaps this year we realize better than ever that we can actually find happiness through simple things that are, in fact, accessible to all. It doesn't matter if you're going to buy a much more expensive bottle of wine, or it doesn't matter if you're going to invest your money in a gold watch, right? What all of us have learned during the pandemic is that we can find happiness from the simple things that are, in fact, accessible to everyone. Sometimes it's just a walk with your significant other, or it's just sometimes a walk with your family, or maybe it might just even be a family activity. But what we have realized from that, what we have, figured out from that, is that sometimes it's just these little things that are important to make you happy. It's definitely not the matte black Ferrari that you can cry in when things go wrong, but it's the fact that you have these simple things that you can share with your family, these simple, activities that you can do with your family, and these are basically simple things that anyone can access, right? And he also says that we have reached peak happiness for stuff, right? Whereas, hikes or swims are, in fact, more reliable mood boosters. COVID-19 has also, diminished the possibility for social comparisons, right? So that is what it's trying to say, especially because what he means is, even though, we've found simple things to do with our lives, even though we found simple things that are more accessible to everyone to enjoy with our families, and things like hikes and swims are, in fact, mood boosters. Sometimes you would choose these things you can do with your family because it just makes you happy. It just gives you a whole different sense of satisfaction, a whole different sense of, not only satisfaction but also happiness, right? Because you're finally content, you're finally satisfied with the kind of life you're living, especially during these tough times, right? So something else that COVID-19 has actually done is it's actually made it very, very hard, or rather it has diminished the possibility of social comparisons, right? Because back then we'd have people comparing, she uses this and he uses that, so there's this huge status. It's basically about power, status, and money, right? Basically, if you use a certain brand and I don't use it, well, then that means you're richer than me, right? Especially, okay, for example, if you can afford Nike shoes but I can't, then that means you are, quite wealthy, you can afford it, right? So there were a lot of social comparisons that actually existed before the pandemic, but if anything now, those social comparisons have, in fact, reduced, right? They still exist, but it's not as prominent and it's not as distinct as it used to be. Now, there's, in fact, this American saying where it says a happy man is a man who makes $100 more than his wife's sister's husband. And that concept, in fact, shows up a lot in in data, right? Now, Viking actually said this because obviously, in terms of talking about happiness, in terms of talking about being happy, what exactly is it that makes us happy? What exactly is it that what exactly does this mean, right? So what he basically means is that we derive pleasure from being more successful than our neighbors or our friends, but we're also anxious that we're not as successful as they are. So while we're happier when we know that we're more successful than other people, we also become anxious when we don't feel like we don't add up, or we don't value up to the levels of success that they have, right? And one of the best ways to actually do this is by purging our social media feeds, right? Because we have so many sparkling shots of Michelin starred meals and even island getaways. And the pandemic has, in fact, reduced angst, envy, and the fear of missing out. Because we know that no one is having fun, probably except the Kardashians and those rich celebrities out there who can actually afford things like that. And that makes us feel better, right? Because we all know that this situation has affected all of us. It's not just you or me. Everyone in the world is affected by it, right? Everyone can't go out the same way that they used to. They can't do the exact same things that they used to. So we know that everyone is in fact affected by this the exact same way. So in a sense, that is also another reason as to why people don't have this fear of missing out, or this social comparisons don't exist anymore, because no one's even flaunting the fact that they can't, or that they've gone out anymore. Because chances are, if you flaunted the fact that you've gone out, it probably might be arrested because you're not supposed to be traveling. And secondly, no one can go out because of the pandemic unless you're super rich and you're absolutely reckless like the Kardashians. Okay, so that's how happiness has in fact increased, and happiness has been much more stable, especially during the pandemic, because people have realized that they have a lot of things in common with other people as well, which in a way is something good, because we're finally coming to terms with the fact that even though you have much more riches than I do, or you're much more richer than I am, that doesn't mean that we're any different. At the end of the day, when we die, we all go to the same place, right? We're all buried in a coffin and we're all put to the ground. So that is one of the things that I live by. But make sure you stay tuned, because I still have a little bit more left to talk to you about happiness and how to be much more happy and how to be much more cheerful. Okay, but until then, make sure you stay tuned, because right now we're actually going to head into a small break.
And it gives them something to look at, and it makes them laugh. It makes them laugh. So that's why I do it.
Oh, and it could be a really good pickup line as well. Ladies who ask, "Hey, excuse me, so why are you wearing something so colorful?" I mean, hey, you can always have something up on your sleeve. I mean, got me thinking. You want to stand out. Why do you want to stand out though so much, especially with these kind of shirts when you're riding? There must be a purpose behind it, right?
Well, when you say a purpose, Nick, what I do, I wear the shirts, mainly one, because they're nice and bright, so they make me visible, especially if I'm riding on the road.
Okay. Yeah, that's very important, right? Because you want cars, yeah.
Very important. And also, like, people see me in like cafes, and perhaps I shouldn't be saying this on here, I suppose, but in the bar afterwards.
All right.
And it gives them something to look at, and it makes them laugh. It makes them laugh. So that's why I do it.
Oh, and it could be a really good pickup line as well. Ladies who ask, "Hey, excuse me, so why are you wearing something so colorful?" I mean, hey, you can always have something up on your sleeve. I mean, you look like a guy who would do.
You know me too well. You know me too well, Nick.
The valuations that you place on an asset are always behind you. It's always in hindsight. It's never in front of you. And that's one of the challenges, right? Because you're always valuing what happened yesterday. And what you need is what's going to happen tomorrow. What am I saving or investing for? Why am I doing it? When will I need the money? And how much money do I need? Yeah. So that's quite important, because when you're looking at your net worth, you got to start with saying, well, what do I want my net worth to be, so that there's a goal, and then work backwards. How do I get there? And if I can start with £50 or $50 a week, if I save that every week, and and you can go online and use calculators online. I don't have to teach you the maths behind it, but you can say, okay, and if I get a 3% return and I put this away for how long will it take to reach my goal? And that's called just this basic cash flow projection calculations. And it's what we use in financial planning all the time. What we say to clients is we say, okay, what is your goal? What is your objective? Where do you want to go to? And we discuss that in a lot of detail and over most of the meeting. And then the rest of it is saying, okay, in your exact circumstances, with your risk profile, with how you feel about investments and pensions and taxes and where you are and who you work with and your education level or your lack of education or how involved you want to be. There's a lot of variables that we take into account, and then we say, okay, here's a plan. You start like this, that's great. And then we review it all the time. And we say, okay, we need to increase it, we're on track, we're not, this is what is happening. Because remember, when you're dealing with assets, the valuations that you place on an asset are always behind you. It's always in hindsight. It's never in front of you. And that's one of the challenges, right? Because you're always valuing what happened yesterday. And what you need is what's going to happen tomorrow. so that's a struggle. Yeah. So there are strategies everywhere from £50 a week up to £100 million pounds. And they're different, right? They range differently from everyone, but and from country to country, to be fair. Different countries have different tax laws, so different vehicles. But from your point of view, at the sort of normal end, I'm not going to call it the low end because I'm in that boat as well. It's as tax efficient as you can get it. That's where you start. You use all the tax efficiencies, and then you step up into different things.
Welcome back to the show. It's your girl Sarah right here on Relax Radio, and you're tuned into the final few minutes of the first hour of the show, okay? But don't worry, because I still have a little bit more left to tell you about how to exactly make yourself feel better, how to cheer up, and how to become much more happier during these trying, tough, difficult times, okay? So don't worry, because I still have so much more left to tell you, and I'm here to keep you company as well. So if you have any thoughts, if you have any questions, make sure to text me on 078-52473-473, because you can share your thoughts, your opinions, and even your experiences with me. If you didn't just realize what I did there, I just combined opinions and experiences together, and I said opiniences. But yeah, sometimes it happens. My brain is a very fuzzy place, but that's just what it is. But actually, if you want to text me, if you want to get in touch with me, if you want to call me, make sure to do that on the number that is available there right on that banner. So make sure you do that. And also, if you have any other thought, if you are very interested in some of the content that we talk about, if you're really interested in some of the things that we share with you, make sure to actually go follow us on our socials, which is Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, okay? So if you really, really like some of that content that we're sharing with you, make sure to do that, because it's definitely going to help you be aware. It's definitely going to help you stay updated about everything that happens in the world as well. And if you want to join this conversation and contribute to this conversation in a much better way, then the best way to do that is, in fact, to go download our app, which is available on both the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store. Okay, you can download it on either your iOS device or even your Android device, and that way you can actually make sure that you are part of this conversation, that you're listening to this conversation from anywhere in the world at any time of the day. Okay, so let's actually get back into our conversation, because a lot of things actually influence our ability to be happy. So several forces outside our control actually influence our ability to be happy. Now this actually includes genetics, and there have actually been studies of identical twins who have shown that they have similar mood levels. And even the natural rhythms of life, for example, happiness tends to follow a U shape, peaking when we're young and old and nosediving in our 40s. And where we live, the least happy countries actually include war-torn Syria, Burundi, and the Central African Republic, right? So obviously, if you live in a country that has a lot of war, that has a lot of disaster, and there is a civil war, then you're not necessarily going to have a happy lifestyle. You're not going to be happy, because obviously you can't be happy when there's so much of death, when there's so much of disaster happening around you, right? When innocent people are losing their lives, it's very, very hard to be happy. So obviously your happiness depends on things like that, right? Your genetics, where you're born, what country you live, and other natural rhythms of your life. Okay. So, one thing that we need to keep in mind is, I don't think we can actually go to people in refugee camps and say, listen, guys, happiness is about a choice, right? And because if you do that, you actually need to acknowledge external and genetic conditions and not put the entire responsibility on the individual, right? Because happiness, yes, of course, sometimes it's a choice, but it's not always necessarily a choice. And you can't really say it's 100% a choice, because happiness also depends on these other things, right? Like I said, where you live, the natural rhythms of your life, your genetics, those things are also, they also influence our happiness, right? So if you actually look at global happiness rankings, the top 10 countries, which are basically the Nordics, the Netherlands, New Zealand, and Switzerland, are in fact all very wealthy, right? And that just goes to show that money does in fact matter. I mean, you can't say that money doesn't matter, because money does matter, especially in terms of happiness, because it's only if you have money that you can afford some of the things that you want, some of the things that you like, right? So it's important to keep that in mind, because obviously, I mean, we have to come to the realization that we're not necessarily going to be happy if we don't have enough money to fund our lifestyle, to fund the kind of life we want to live, right? Now, a nation's success at converting wealth into well-being mostly comes down to its ability to eliminate sources of unhappiness, okay? Which means that the country needs to know how exactly to eliminate the sources of unhappiness, how exactly to work around that issue. Because if the country doesn't know how exactly to do it, it's not necessarily going to bring the sources of unhappiness down, right? And some of these countries who have actually struggled to do this actually are include Italy, right, where women are significantly less happy than men because of gender inequality. And in Spain, where there is high youth unemployment that affects the morale of the people in Spain. And even South Korea, where pressures on young people's academic performance has in fact been linked to high suicide rates, right? So the fact of the matter is, if there is a huge amount of pressure, if you don't have employment, if there's high levels of inequality, then those are the sources of unhappiness that you actually need to spend money on to in fact eliminate, right? So you need to keep that in mind as well. But something else that you need to keep in mind, and something else that we all need to keep in mind, I believe, is that in terms of unhappiness, in terms of changing the sources of unhappiness of these countries, if we're talking about Denmark, which happens to be one of the biggest, or rather one of the happiest countries in the world, Denmark's widespread access to education and healthcare actually removes anxiety, and it induces competitiveness. And what Viking said was, he likes to say that Nordic countries are not the happiest in the world, they are the least unhappy, right? It doesn't mean that they're happiest, it just means they're the least in terms of unhappiness, right? So what he says is, he thinks that we know a lot of the things that he's already telling us, things like that our relationships matter, that having a short commute and a fulfilling job matters, and having enough money to get by matters, and comparisons to others even matter, right? So we already know these things that we're being told. So why exactly is it so hard for us to be happy then? Why exactly do we find, or do we have such a hard time to be happy, right? And it all just comes down to the way we think, the way we see, right? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, your relationships you have with people, the job you have, do in fact affect your happiness, right? Because you have to be satisfied to be happy, otherwise you're not necessarily going to be happy. Yet, even if people don't already know these things, if we need to be reminded of these things, it's just that we forget these things often, right? We just need to be reminded of the things that we have, of the things that we should be grateful for, and the things that actually contribute to happiness, such as the fact that more money does not actually always translate to more happiness. Just because you have a lot of money doesn't mean you'll always be happy. Sometimes you'll have a lot of money but be really unhappy because you don't have people, you don't have friends, family to share that money with, to share your memories, your experiences of life with. So then you're not necessarily going to be happy. So his advice is actually, if you feel your happiness level is jammed on a 5 out of 10, you have to basically ask yourself, what would you do to maybe lift it to a 6, right? If you're lonely, it might mean joining a club, right? Which is in fact a big thing in Denmark, and where you can see if you can strike up new friendships. So if you wanted to increase your happiness, what exactly would you do? That's what it ultimately boils down to. The secret of that is actually that there's no secret. Okay, there's no secret to being happy. There's no special spell or secret or equation to actually being happy. The mere act of consciously turning our mind to what could make us sunnier is in fact a start, right? If we actually figure out what makes us happy, then we have realized how we can be happy. We just need to figure out how to do it, right? And that's literally just it. Okay, now make sure you stay tuned because I will be back in a few minutes to keep talking to you about fashion and how fashion can in fact be very, very exploitative. Okay, so until then, make sure you stay tuned because right now I'm going to end this broadcast, but don't worry because I will be back in a few minutes.